famous as naturalist known for his contributions to evolutionary biology, born on February 12, 1809, died on April 19, 1882, born in the Mount House, Shrewsbury, England. Charles Robert Darwin was a naturalist and geology expert from England, who is most well known for propounding the theory of evolution that is often regarded as among the most significant findings in the history of biology. He studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh before going on to attend Christ's College at the University of Cambridge. It was at Cambridge that he followed his lifelong passion of the natural sciences. After completed a voyage on HMS Beagle that lasted 5 years, Darwin started studying all that he collected during that time in 1838, and eventually laid the foundations of the path-breaking theory of natural. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. It is those who know little, not those who know much, who so positively assert that this or that problem will never be solved by science. An American monkey, after getting drunk on brandy, would never touch it again, and thus is much wiser than most. We must, however, acknowledge, as it seems to me, that man with all his noble qualities still bears in his bodily frame the indelible stamp of his lowly origin. In the long history of humankind, and animal kind too, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. One general law, leading to the advancement of all organic beings, namely, multiply, vary, let the strongest live and the weakest die. Besides love and sympathy, animals exhibit other qualities connected with the social instincts which in us would be called moral. Nothing is easier than to admit in words the truth of the universal struggle for life, or more difficult, at least I have found it so, than constantly to bear this conclusion. We can allow satellites, planets, suns, universe, nay whole systems of universe, to be governed by laws, but the smallest insect, we wish to be created at once. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, not the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to the loss of these tastes for poetry and music is a loss of happiness, and may possibly be injurious to the intellect, and more probably to the moral character, by enfeebling the emotional. I feel most deeply that the whole subject is too profound for the human intellect. A dog might as well speculate on the mind of Newton. Let each man hope and believe what he can. Natural selection almost inevitably causes much extinction of the less improved forms of life and induces what I have called divergence of character. The question of whether there exists a creator and ruler of the universe has been answered in the affirmative by some of the highest intellects that have ever existed. But natural selection, as we shall hereafter see, is a power incessantly ready for action, and is immeasurably superior to man's feeble efforts, as the works of nature are to. A fair result can be obtained only by fully stating and balancing the facts and arguments on both sides of each question. The limit of man's knowledge in any subject possesses a high interest, which is perhaps increased by its close neighborhood to the realms of imagination. But then arises the doubt, can the mind of man, which has, as I fully believe, been developed from a mind as low as that possessed by the lowest animal, be trusted when it draws such grand conclusions? A grain in the balance will determine which individual shall live, and which shall die, which variety or species shall increase in number, and which shall decrease, or finally become extinct. But a plant on the edge of a desert is said to struggle for life against the drought, though more properly it should be said to be dependent upon the moisture. I have always maintained that, excepting fools, men did not differ much in intellect, only in zeal and hard work. And I still think there is an eminently important difference. Englishmen rarely cry, except under the pressure of the acutest grief, whereas in some parts of the continent the men shed tears much more readily and freely. I have stated that in the 13 species of ground finches, a nearly perfect gradation may be traced, from a beak extraordinarily thick to one so fine that it may be compared to that of a warbler. The expression often used by Mr. Herbert Spencer of the survival of the fittest is more accurate, and is sometimes equally convenient. Or she may accept, as appearances would sometimes lead us to believe, not the male which is the most attractive to her, but the one which is the least distasteful. In regard to the amount of difference between the races, we must make some allowance for our nice powers of discrimination gained by a long habit of observing ourselves. When I view all beings not as special creations, but as the lineal descendants of some few beings which lived long before the first bed of the Cambrian system was deposited, they seem to me to become a novel. It is no valid objection that science as yet throws no light on the far higher problem of the essence or origin of life. Who can explain what is the essence of the attraction of? I have deeply regretted that I did not proceed far enough at least to understand something of the great leading principles of mathematics, for men thus endowed seem to have an extra sense. What an extraordinary thing it is, Mr. Darwin seems to spend hours in cracking a horsewhip in his room, for I often hear the crack when I pass under his I hope that I may be excused for entering on these personal details, as I give them to show that I have not been hasty in coming to a decision. I think an agnostic would be the more correct description of my state of mind. The whole subject of God is beyond the scope of man's. I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created parasitic wasps, with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars. Man in his arrogance thinks himself a great work, worthy of the interposition of a deity. More humble, and I believe truer, to consider him created. Sexual selection acts in a less rigorous manner than natural selection. The latter produces its effects by the life or death at all ages of the more or less successful individual. Nevertheless, it is probable that the hearing rather early in life such views maintained and praised may have favored my upholding them under a different form in my Origin of Species. This preservation of favorable individual differences and variations, and the destruction of those which are injurious, I have called natural selection, or the survival of the Natural selection rendered evolution scientifically intelligible. It was this more than anything else which convinced professional biologists like Sir Joseph Hooker, T. H. Huxley and Ernst Haeckel